Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Dr. John Michael Salvato, and you're watching The Brew. Evidence of ancestor veneration can be found in records from ancient Egypt, from which it's thought to have spread throughout Africa to ancient Rome, the Far East, and even as far as the land of the Vikings. Honoring the sacred ancestors is part of our pagan culture, a culture that's shared with the Buddhists, Shinto, Hindu, Ifa, Bon, and many of the world's other shamanic traditions. And we really don't know where it began because I think it's something that comes from the human experience, not necessarily from a particular culture. Well, on today's show, we're going to hear from three practitioners who share what their ancestral practices look like, why it's part of their work, and maybe some of their insights into ideas for those of you that are tuning in during this time of the year when the veil between worlds is at its thinnest. So sit back, relax, and we will be back in just a second. And we are back. Welcome, everybody. And let me just see if I can go ahead and get the display names turned on real quick here. Welcome again to The Brew. For those of you who are watching for the first time, this is a weekly program that we say is devoted to queer spirituality, culture, and news. And I see that our one of our guests is now just logging in. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him into the room. Richard, before we get started, let's do a really quick impromptu sound check and see whether you're cutting out when we have our mics on.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you beautifully. All right, that's perfect. Well, guys, today our guests include Marshall McCall, a practicing Strego from the Misfit tradition, Vanessa Codorniu, whose last name I probably just completely butchered. Who I would describe her as a shamanic priestess, an intuitive and teacher in my neck of the woods here in South Central Pennsylvania, and friend of the show, our resident storyteller and a practitioner and member of the Doreen Valiente Foundation in London, England, Richard Levy. So guys, welcome to the show. Welcome to a discussion that I'm really looking forward to at this time of year, but a discussion that I think a conversation we probably have to have other times in the year as well. Because this concept of ancestor veneration and working with the mighty dead isn't new for those of us who've sort of been around the pagan oak tree for some time. Ancient cultures often venerated those who came before them, and even now in contemporary society, it's not uncommon to find celebrations that honor our ancestors in a variety of ways. In fact, I would say that while we try to be mindful and to avoid cultural appropriation, living in an information age when we have access to so many ideas and we can see exposure, we can have exposure to so many different cultures. I think that the ways that we express ancestor veneration on a personal level are beginning to evolve too and become as diverse as our community. So my first question for each one of you, I actually just realized I should have turned the comment section on. My first question for each one of you is, how does this idea manifest in your personal practice? Do you work with the ancestors? Do you keep an altar? Or is there some other sort of tradition for you that you use to honor and remember your sacred dead or your ancestors? Let's go ahead and start with Richard.
So recently in the Jewish religion, you had Yom Kippur, and that means that's the Day of Atonement, and it comes 10 days after the New Year. And one of the things that is done is you light what's called a Yahrzeit candle. Yahrzeit candle is usually lasts for about 24 to 48 hours, and it's in honor of the dead. Now, you do that on the anniversary of a death, but you also do it on Yom Kippur, which I absolutely love. I think it's a really good time to do it as well. But I would say that in the West, I think we have a very, very bad, in general, relationship with death and dead and dying and that kind of related thing. And you go to certain places. I remember when I went, you see people eating at the graveyards with their dead. It's a very different relationship. And there are very many ways to it. I myself don't keep an altar, and that's not because I have a problem with them. It's just not how I work with the dead and my ancestors. But it's, I think, quite a key way of working. And I would encourage people to have at least some knowledge of their ancestry as much as they can, because sometimes it's hard. It's hard in my situation because Judaism and Jewish people have moved and been chucked out and killed, and you lose roots. Like, one thing that always got me is when I meet people who've got very, very defined roots in the land they're on. It's something I'm very not used to. And of course, with that, like you say, we've had, because we've travelled, we've picked up things along the way. Because people have travelled here, we've picked stuff along the way. So, Dia de los Muertos is much more well known than it used to be. I don't think people are necessarily doing a great job with it, but what I do like is, at the very least, is this idea of bringing the dead into life, that we're always dancing with the dead.
Absolutely brilliant. And I want to ask some more questions of all of you. And Richard, you just gave me a couple more ideas of that. Vanessa, how about for your tradition, and what does that look like? How is that expressed? And in fact, since this is your first time on the show, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your tradition.
Thank you so much. And so I'm a South American immigrant to this country. I arrived at about a year old. And so my tradition is one based in Catholicism and Spiritism. I didn't really know what it was as a child. I just saw that we had built in our house special spaces into the wall. It was like a built-in altar almost. And not only were there saints in that built-in altar, but we also had photographs of the deceased of our great-grandmother, great-grandfather. And once a week, I would see my grandparents at different times, like it wasn't a set time, go and light this candle. Now, because of their Catholic tradition, um, I felt a little limited by it. But the way that most of the ancestor work came to me is because I'm also a psychic and a medium. So my great grandparents started talking to me and guiding me. And so that was some of my earliest memories of my tradition. I would describe it probably as eclectic. At first, I didn't realize I was initiated into Awakened tradition in New York City like 26 years ago, but yet didn't feel fully rooted there. Then I went in to study Santeria, Afro-Caribbean traditions, and then went into studying shamanism of this country, specifically Lakota traditions. I've sweat lodges for 10 years. And at first I felt a little like, why am I all over the place? And so I related with what Richard was saying. My people, the more I studied them, they had only been in certain countries for less than 100 years, 150 years at most. My last name is Romanian. I have no connection to that. Yet my great grandfather Italian, from this France. My grandmother was indigenous, but yet left at an orphanage, so we don't know what tribe. And so for me, it became following that inner guidance, taking what was around me, my grandparents honoring their dead, by having a special place in the house and by telling stories about them and sharing their wisdom, sharing their follies, sharing their personality traits. And that was the beginning of it. I do have an altar in my home. Once a week, sometimes more, I light a candle at that altar, and it's the altar for the people who've passed over. I also have other shelves where I have people who are alive, who I may be working with, or praying or holding space for them and their healing. But those who have deceased are above the rest of the other. And from this Latin almost santero, even though I'm not an initiated santero or santera, is this energy of elevating the dead, because not all of the dead are well, right? Not all of our ancestors are healthy. A lot of them are carrying trauma or were mean people and when they were alive. And so this energy of elevating them and continuing to pray for their, not only giving thanks for their journeys and what they've done, but also for their own wellness, is something that is at the core of my practice. And then I hear them. right? Like when I started belly dancing, I felt such a pull. And while I was in class and I used to perform, this was years ago, my great grandmother showed up, my grandmother, my aunt, who was still alive but had serious dementia. Their energy showed up. They're like, thank you, thank you. We always wanted to do this. When I talked to my aunt before she passed in Argentina, she said, they tell me that you belly dance. She goes, when I tried, they shut me down. I'm getting a little emotional, but for me, a lot of the ancestor work is about being able to do as a woman what couldn't be done in the past. So I hope that answers your question.
Wow, that's powerful, and that really ties in with something that we were talking about on the show last week, and we're going to talk about, I think, in a couple minutes, which is that one of the greatest works that we can do in a time when there's been so much cultural appropriation, so much oppression, discrimination, is begin to take responsibility for healing our own ancestry as a whole, healing the if we come from a European background, healing that colonialism, healing just the entire experience of our spirituality, the evolution of our spirituality. And for me, when we started talking about that last week, that's really been on my mind all week. And Vanessa, you're doing a beautiful job of that and a powerful job. And that's just further confirmation for me that part of the work for the witch, the shaman, the pagan, the psychic, however our viewers identify, part of that work is really not just about healing yourself, but by becoming intimate. One of our guests last week, um, Chiron, had a beautiful uh, way of looking at this, and he said that journey to healing comes from intimacy. And so I applaud you about to that work that you're doing. Marshall, let's hear from you. What does this practice of ancestor work, and I know that you and I share a little bit of that same the roots of that same tradition. So what does that look like? How does that manifest for you, brother?
The ancestry work that I do is everything that magic wise that I do. I always pull in my ancestors, not only family, but I look at it a little bit differently as to the ancestors are not just blood relations, but you have so many other ancestors that you can pull on now that are just so knowledgeable and so strong. Raven Grimassi being one, being Strega based. I pull on him frequently. Anytime that I'm in the kitchen throwing together some incense or some oils or whatever, and I need a little bit of guidance, I pull on Scott Cunningham. There's just so many people that you can pull on um, that have fallen under the ancestor category. Being Strega trained, we once a year have our big Shadow Fest festival around the Halloween time, and that would be all dedicated to the ancestors and the past dead, and what we do then is just celebrate what they brought into our lives one way or another. I do have, when my altar is set up, I do have an ancestral flame that I do keep burning on my altar at all times. We just recently moved, and I have yet to find that space that has called out for me yet. But the ancestors are here to guide and protect and to draw from, and that is my practice. That is what I do.
Right on. It's interesting, always interesting for me to hear other people's traditions. And one of the things that you said, Marshall, that I wanted to touch on too is that when we speak of ancestors in our tradition, in the Stregoneria tradition, for me, which is sort of the precursor to Raven Grimassi's Stregaria, which for my people would have just been called Benedicaria. It was more of it was very similar to what Vanessa spoke about, where Benedicaria takes aspects of Catholicism and the veneer of Catholicism and lays it over top of what we're doing so that we wouldn't be oppressed. And in our tradition, we say that there are three different types of ancestors. There are ancestors of blood, there are ancestors of time and space, and there are ancestors of place. And so when you talk about calling in Raven, calling in Scott Cunningham, those are the ancestors of our tribe, and what I would consider to be that those ancestors that fall under time and space. On my ancestral altar, there are people like Harvey Milk, who it represents for me one of the great ancestors for the LGBTQ community. There are ancestors that, and for me it's almost a I'm not going to say uncomfortable, but odd topic to discuss. It's one that I've avoided discussing on these forums before because it is so intimate, it is so personal. And for me, it's a spillover because there's that ancestry of blood, that ancestry, and a lot of folks will say, well, when you set up your ancestral altar, don't bring anyone onto that, don't put anyone on that altar with whom you didn't have a good relationship, or anyone who was a bad person, or anyone. The first people that I put on that altar when I was a kid of 7 or 8 years old were the ones I had problems with, because that's how that intimacy's grown. But this is open to anyone who wants to jump in first. Despite the neo-pagan tradition conflating Halloween with the observance of Samhain, and we're not going to get into the details of that, but because the two traditions, those two observances fall a week apart, and while clearly Halloween has its roots in Catholicism, the tradition of honoring the sacred dead does spill over into both. We recognize that the veil is thinner at this time of year, and in our show last week, like I said, we talked about healing European colonialism through cultivating greater intimacy with our heritage, and the Bruja Carolina that was on, Carolina Gonzalez, was beautifully said that if we just start to look at our own family background, at our own ancestry, there's so much more. There's such a richer culture to draw from because it's ours. That's a great place to start in healing that. So in the interest of embracing more authentic and a more personal relationship with the ancestors, I draw from the Italo-Africano diasporic traditions, because my family, coming from originally being Etruscan, then migrating to Sicily, where the Etruscan and African traditions, both of which were dark-skinned peoples, came together and really started to form a new culture that then went to southern Italy. I find wholeness in that. I find a sense of identity in that. But we don't have to really get hung up on figuring out. You don't have to spit in the jar or whatever you do to send it to ancestry.com. You just have to listen to what's going on. And so I think the first person I want to hear from on this is, because I think it'll give us a good jumping off point, is Vanessa. Because Vanessa, you're doing some incredible work with working with the Akashic records, with your Akashic record readings, and I encourage folks to check it out. In fact, when this show is over, if all of you wouldn't mind putting your contact information in the comments on Facebook, so that people can connect with you and begin to follow you and watch. In Vanessa's case, check out these lives that she does, because they really are incredible. But I know that you're also getting ready to do something very special here that I think folks that are watching from the tri-state area, from Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey might want to tap into, that you're getting ready to offer in a couple weeks, that's specific to this tradition of honoring our ancestors. Tell us how you do that, and does somebody have to have their whole ancestry.com DNA profile in order to be able to honor their ancestors.
No, and thank you, because it's so interesting. I just moved to Pennsylvania 2 years ago. I fell in love and moved here for love. And as I was putting stuff up, my partner was like, you've got stuff from Greece and Italy, and you've got an altar with this goddess, that goddess in Egypt. And I did do my DNA, and it was as varied as the stuff I was putting up. But that's the stuff I was called to. I was being called to the areas that the DNA right reflected right back. So we don't need to do that. Being in New York, and like I was saying, being from another country, and then feeling and hearing the ancestors and doing the readings and seeing that many ancestors were calling their people back. They were calling back to their gifts. They were calling them back to heal them. I started holding about 20 years ago in New York a very diverse circle. And so I didn't make it of any particular tradition, because some Orthodox Jewish people were showing up, believe it or not, women were showing up, Muslim women were showing up, people were showing up who were terrified, but they're like, for some reason, I feel called. So I wanted to be as diverse as we are on the planet. Now, when we enter the space, we go through a time of clearing and healing. I ask Reiki practitioners, right? We know Reiki is a Japanese tradition, but we have hands-on healing all over the world, to do some work to ground people as they first walk in. There's a communal altar that's created, so we all add our ancestors. And if we don't have a picture, if we don't have something, it's okay to ask, as you were saying, ancestors of place, right? Like now I talk to the ancestors of place because I'm new to Pennsylvania. So when I first even moved in, I was like, hey, hi, I don't know much about you, would love to develop a relationship. So if people want to come to this event but don't have pictures or images or jewelry, we can ask an ancestor of place, hey, can I bring this rock to this? Can I bring a leaf? Can I come forward with something? And in this space, I do call on the directions, because I believe as we call in the directions, we're calling in aspects of ourselves. Right? We're calling our mind, we're calling our illumination, we're calling our passion, our courage, we're calling our spirit, our bodies, Mother Earth, and the other ancestors. And then we journey. And in this journey, we ask first ourselves, what is this story, or what is this pattern that I'm carrying and maybe have inflicted upon others or myself? And what is a sacred gift that I feel that I am bringing into the world, or I feel like I can bring into the world? And in this journey, we go back to that ancestry. And so we don't need to know. When I went back to certain ancestries, I didn't have any evidence that at some point my ancestors actually mummified and kept the people near. And then I talked to a Peruvian priestess who was from Peru, and I was born there, and said, Vanessa, that's Andean magic. And I'm like, I didn't know. We don't have a connection to that. And so just trusting that our higher self, our angels, our guides, our ancestors are bringing us to where we need to go for the healing. And so we explore, where do we need to go? We ask for forgiveness or forgive, or maybe just embrace our ancestors who've been through pain. We ask them, do you need anything from us? Can I do something to support you, to elevate your healing, to allow more of your healing? And what do I bring back? What can I bring back and allow you to kind of live through me, right? Through the work that I do in the world. So we ask those two questions, how can I help heal you? And how can I continue to further the sacred magic or the sacred medicine that you have in the world? And that's what we do. And then, of course, clearing and grounding when the circle. And I think at the heart of it, and I think all of you who are practicing these traditions, community has been lost in so many different ways. And so the point of the event is to begin to recreate, to gather sacred community beyond boundaries, beyond races, beyond traditions, beyond religions, beyond all of that.
Right on. And you, for those of you that are watching, Vanessa will put contact information and a link specific to that event as well for those of you who would like to be there. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you. And it's happening November 1st.
November 1st. So,
right.
At a fortuitous time for many folks, and during that window between the tradition of Samhain and the neo-pagan observation of Samhain on Halloween. So rather than doing what I would normally do at this time of year and trying to educate folks incessantly for the 3 weeks in October and saying, this is not Samhain. I decided this year I was going to say it once, let it go, and then just allow myself to be in that space. So I'd love to do right now is if any of you that are guests and anybody who's watching have questions for one another, or questions for me or whatever, go ahead and ask those. If you're watching, go ahead and type them in the comments, and we'll put them up on the screen. And those of you, of course, that are here, just feel free to ask any questions or add any comments, any observations that you'd like to share with folks at this time of year.
I think I would like to add in there too, as far as calling the ancestors during ritual time. I just want to share how I do it, because it's a little bit unique. I just don't call on the ancestors who have already passed. I believe that there's a threefold part of the ancestors. I call on the ancestors who have passed, the ones who are here walking with us, and the ones who have yet to come, because I do believe that there is a rotation, that this is not all that it is in this physical form, that when we're done here, we move on either to a higher plane, or we repeat what we've done here to learn whatever lessons that we haven't learned yet. And I do believe that our ancestors are in that rotation as well. So I feel that honoring whatever process or whatever situation that their ancestors are in, and by calling on those, kind of connect you a little bit more stronger to that situation and to those ancestors.
Wow, that's a really great perspective. Thank you. Anything you would like to add, Richard? I know it's getting later for you. It's what, 8 o'clock?
That's not too late for me. I'm a bit of a night owl.
Okay.
No, I was thinking about the fact that it's interesting when I think about it, the fact that my main reasons of coming on here, one was storytelling, which of course I would say on an ancestral level is extremely meaningful. But of course the other is working for the Doreen Valiente Foundation, which is of course in honor of a person who has often been called the mother of modern witchcraft. And someone I think is a remarkable figure in our very modern history. She only died in 1999. If I'd have been maybe a bit older and put in a bit of effort, I could have easily met her. She did not live that far from me, really. In fact, where she lived in Brighton is somewhere I often visit. The thing I think that's I do agree that it's not just about the ancestors of your blood. It's your ancestors of land and spirits, and all that plays its part. In fact, probably I would say in my situation it's mostly the latter than the blood, if I'm honest. But I wouldn't say it's something that I feel I'm so close to that it's kind of intrinsic, which is why I do believe in having a time of year to honor it, because the rest of the time you're just living it. And I know it sounds like which is a good thing. I think that's the whole point of magic in general, is you're living it. Yeah. But I do think it's that when you mark it, there's a different kind of elevation. I believe in bringing magic to the ordinary, but also, and I think this is also, it's a Jewish thing, is that our word for holy is linked to the word for separation, which I don't always believe in. I believe actually it should sometimes be intermingled. But I also believe that there is an elevation you can add to the separation, which is what times like this do now. I think it's interesting because of course that's the other thing. In the UK, things are very different. I have a lot of respect for Wicca in the UK, in the sense that I actually feel in its origins, and certainly amongst the initiatory tradition, its efforts are doing exactly what we've been talking about, which was healing the here and now, and the ancestors of the land there. And I think the further it goes from the UK, the harder it gets to often do that. And of course, what I see in a lot of now when people talk about Wicca specifically is they're talking about very eclectic Wicca, where people have kind of taken it on in a very different way, and particularly they are doing a degree of appropriation, because when you're not initiated, you don't understand the information, because information isn't magic, it's through the experience of the mystery. And the reason I mention that is because I do think, like the last conversation we had, I think had a lot of impact actually, between Carolina and Kai. I was very intrigued by this vocabulary that I've never really thought about it in that way. And I do think that, of course, you draw very much from your past in terms of blood, in terms of spirit, in terms of land. And I feel that we are always making efforts to do that, at least. But I do think on a wider level, like I said initially, we have a very poor relationship in a lot of the Western world with with death and dying in its entirety.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate that because I do think that, and I think your observations about the problems within what we perceive as Wicca are often really what's happening in Wicca in the quote unquote new world. In the Americas, where it is more eclectic and where there isn't, I think, possibly because while this land is as ancient and has such beautiful ancient history as we find in the British Isles, what happens here in the United States is we tend to have this myopic idea that the history of this land began when the Italian rapists came on behalf of Ferdinand to just pillage the land and destroy the land and murder the people. That isn't the history here, and so we can. Like, I've always lived in places that are old in terms of history in the United States. There is on my block. We live in a 100-year-old building. There's a few buildings here that are in the 200 to 230-year-old, and then there's new construction. But when I say that to having gone to school in Europe, when I say that to some of my friends in East London, they laugh at me because a 100-year-old home is new construction. There are homes that are 500, 600, 700 years, maybe older there, and so we really do have to do the work to get in touch, not just with our ancestors of blood, but the ancestors of place, and I think, for me personally, the ancestors in nature itself. So the
Yeah.
work that I do along the riverfront, and the ancestors of the trees, the ancestors of the flowers, the ancestors of the water, really make a big difference too. We've got a comment here that may not fit on the screen. Let's see. It does. Ellen Holloway says, I'm learning about connecting to my ancestors and have read and watched videos that say you should start connecting to the healed ancestors before you start working with the unhealed. You have a different point of view, and just curious to understand why that is or isn't true. I will leave that to our guests to comment on. I think that's a really good point for me personally. That is, probably the way that most people may want to approach that, unless they feel called to work with a specific ancestor. In which case, I would say, for me personally, I would go with intuition. I would go with that higher wisdom. But what do you guys think?
Um, as someone who works with people every day, I think that going with your intuition is key. The thing that I think we're being told to go, I've read those videos too, I've seen those videos too as well, is because I think lay people and most people don't sometimes have the skills of grounding, of clearing, of cleansing, of protection. And if so, you're thinking of someone and calling them on, and they were secretly an alcoholic or some other thing. What I found and what I've seen is soul attachment, right? So, not to scare anyone. And so, I believe that it's best to start with a healthy ancestor and to your relationship, as Marshall was saying, with those in your bloodline, with those of place to honor the different levels, to be secure in this space, to then go into the deep work of being able to handle. Because I've seen people who've said, "Oh, I connected with this, and now I'm crying every day." And I'm like, "Tell me, were your grandmothers? Did they suffer? Were they in bad relationships?" She's like, "Oh yes." And now I'm in depression right now. And so I've seen this happen where it's this invoking of an unhealed ancestor can wreak havoc in your life. And so I would recommend to most to start that way, unless you're already a practitioner of magic, of some healing path that you're very deeply rooted in. and then you're secure to be able to tackle something that can be overwhelming.
I would suggest that, first of all, anyone who wants to learn to connect with ancestors, spirits, whatever you name it, first of all, make sure you have the basic groundwork already in place. Make sure, as Vanessa was saying, you know how to ground, you know how to protect. If things go funky, which working with the spirits sometimes does, you have to know what to do and when to do it. If not, you are opening doors that you cannot shut. Don't just start off by saying, "Oh, I'm going to be a spirit worker," and not know how to call the quarters or how to put up a protection bubble or anything. No, you don't do that. Learn the basics first before you go on to something that's considered advanced magic.
Richard, anything you want to add?
Well, firstly, I do need to echo, I think, this element of foundation skills. You do need to have your foundation settled to do most of this to it. It doesn't even matter if it's ancestral. You should have your basic foundation skills level. Now, I don't know if this, because this person obviously has just written a comment, can't include. So maybe they already have, and they're asking in that context. If that's the case, I'm inclined to say that that I don't know why anyone would choose to work with an ancestor that wasn't healthy first. I don't know why anyone would make that choice, and I would be very curious as to know why, because it makes me feel like they've got a bit of a savior thing going on, and they want to rescue. Whereas that will come when it comes. If you want to reach out, you do something simple. If what comes to you is less than simple, then I have to be honest, then I do believe you've got work to do because you're the one who reached out. And the minute you know, magic doesn't happen in a vacuum. The minute you do something, you know, I know there are people who like the idea that they only ever work with themselves. That maybe the work certainly, but it's a stone in a pond. It causes ripples. It's unavoidable. And I would always say that if what comes to you, you have to take responsibility because you still threw that stone. So do take care of what you do, absolutely. And I wouldn't go out of my way to do it. But I'm a very different. I do have, and it's perhaps not always the best thing for everyone. I do have a more, just because it was myself, I have a more sink or swim approach to this stuff, because I do think also the failures are lessons. They either teach you to do it better next time, or they stop you from doing it ever again. Whichever way you learn is up to you. But my instinct would obviously say, like, don't just go for that unless it was coming to you in some way. You go for the thing that's simple. It's the same when I meet people who tell me desperately they want to be an exorcist. I think they're crazy. If you genuinely want to, no one should want that. If it's work that comes to you, then hopefully you've got the resources, resolve, and actually sense of humor to survive it. But you've got to treat it as serious work. And I think this is in many ways the same, because what you're doing is you're engaging with a force that is directly connected to you. You know, you don't even have to forge the connection. The connection part is there. You are then responsible for healing it, clearing it, keeping it basically well. So I would always say, just go for what's simple. Don't overcomplicate it.
Right on. And you know, we're coming down to the wire, to our last 5 minutes, but there was one more question that I wanted to get to, if I can, if I could ask you guys to stay on for the last 5 minutes. And to our viewers, I apologize. We used to say that this was going to be a 30-minute show. I have given that up at the end of season 3. This is gonna happen.
No one wants a 30-minute show.
Yeah,
No.
so we're at least 45 minutes. And this question comes from my dear friend Anne Marie. And she says, I don't believe that I have healthy or healed ancestors. I spent 40 years reconciling generational trauma. I am intuitively drawn to one side over the other. And I think I would like to kind of jump in on that one first. And it really ties in with a lot of what we were saying, Anne Marie, because when things like that come up for us, okay, that's a difference between choosing the side. There's a distinct difference between choosing the side of unhealthy versus healthy, and being at a point where an opportunity has arisen for you to break that generational trauma, for you to be the one that heals that. But what I would say is that before you approach that, the engagement with those ancestors any further, just take a step back, take a breath back, make sure that you're grounded, make sure that you're doing the right healing and cleansing rituals afterwards, but really focus that attention on healing you. And the way that you do that is to recognize that your ancestors go beyond those that you know. So for me, I say those ancestors known and unknown, because let's face it, every single one of us that are here are have common ancestors. We have common roots as humanity. We are one race, and so as a result, your immediate circle of ancestry that you're familiar with may have experienced trauma, may have experienced horrific things. On my grandmother's side, on my maternal grandmother's side, they lived through the Holocaust, and most of that part of the family was destroyed in a very short period of time. So those ancestors have extreme trauma, and if I'm not careful in working with those ancestors, I can get into a place because of empathy, because of that heart connection and that blood connection. The water that courses through our veins is the water, the blood that ran from those people's bodies, and it can become a very dark, very you know, depressing, beyond depressing. There's no word for it. A very horrifying place to be. But know that you have ancestors too that come from a healthier and more whole place. So I would always call on those ancestors unknown. That's all you have to refer to them, and open your heart and say to those ancestors unknown who can lift me up, who can bring a sense of wholeness and protection to this space. And once you've done that, know that those ancestors have been standing by waiting to do so, and have probably been protecting you all along. But when you say, please bring your protection into this space, now you've created a space that's safe to work with those ancestors whose trauma you're trying to heal. But again, by healing that first in yourself. You guys, on the panel today, share some of your thoughts, because I know that each of you in some way has done that, especially in the in the context of the traditions you come from.
I don't know about the other two, but the whole idea of a healthy, unhealthy spirit or ancestor, not boggles my mind, but it's something that my mind's not wrapping around, because with my experience, I have found that everybody has baggage, living or dead, and just because your basic bodily life functions have ended doesn't mean that your baggage has ended. I think that is an energy that is transferred over. You can even see that with dementia patients who know that they need to do something, or know that something is going wrong and that it needs to be addressed, but not knowing exactly what it is. I believe that's where your ancestors that have passed on, that's in the state that they're in. They know that there's something there, but they don't know what it is any longer, and they're reaching out to the empath in the family, or the psychic in the family, or the one who has an open mind in the family that can easily hear and see them to get this baggage taken care of. I've also found that the spirits or the ancestors with the most baggage are also the ones who are the loudest, who are the ones who come to the forefront the first. Aunt Peggy, who lived to be 102 years old, who never had any issues her whole life, isn't going to pop up and say, "Hey, I need help." But someone who is, emotionally dependent and had ABCD issues and trauma in their life is going to jump up and shout, "Look at me, look at me, look at me." But then again, you also have to be careful, and you have to tread lightly, because dealing with family ancestors and this baggage. This isn't some stranger's baggage that you're handling. This is potentially something that can open up and fall into your lap as well. It's because it's family, because it's an issue that maybe not everyone knew about, or people who are still living don't want other people to know about. So you have to tread lightly and be careful. And whenever you start listening to the spirits, take it with baby steps and be very, very careful.
I agree with I agree with what was said about now I'm somewhere else, but it'll come to me. I think we have to take it with baby steps, and I also feel that we have to. This is what I agree with: starting with yourself, starting with your own self love, focusing in on yourself. Um, for me, yes, everybody has baggage, but like some of my ancestors came in who were more spiritual, who were not racist, who were very loving, who saw someone was gay in the family and embraced them. There are also others who were not, who probably were torturing. I don't know. I don't know them. They're back there. But some of my oppressor, uh, unhealed um ancestors, still might think that, right? And in my sacred work, like creating a diverse circle in space and community, like that's the main thing for me to be very inclusive, is to do part of the healing work. As for being pulled in one direction or another, you know I really believe in working with professionals. I really believe in working with people. As much that I've been doing healing work on myself and honoring my ancestors for like 30 years, I think, or more, when my mom became very ill, almost like I thought she was about to cross over, and I was so sad and unsettled. Although I know about birth, death, rebirth, oh, I know that we're in a wheel and she's going to come back. Of course, I know this, but that's my mom, and I adore her, and I want to hug her and see her and tell her things over the phone and in person. I worked with someone to work on some of the unhealed aspects of my ancestor story to help her and help myself as we were going through this. Thankfully, she's still here. So, for the person who asked that question, thank you for it. Um, Begin with yourself, love yourself, know that everybody's in a process, that the ones who need the most help are going to speak first, but also that we need to sometimes work and be held, right? We need to be held in our own journey. We need to be held. Sometimes we can't hold the space and do everything while we're also crying and tending to our inner child, or tending to our great, 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 great grandmother's inner child who may be coming out. So seek out spaces of healing and support, and really check references, because a lot of people do BS on their bio. We're in an era of commoditization of spirituality and wellness, and everybody, goes to a weekend workshop, and now I'm a healer and I'm going to guide you. And they may, right? I mean, it's true. This is what I do for my work, and trust me, I didn't know, I didn't really want to. I kept getting dragged and dragged, and I know that I carry the breaking of the chains, because there's like four generations of known psychics and mediums in my family, and everybody was like, shh, and I'm the first one. But just know that we really need to find those experts and talk to them a couple of times, even before you hire them, to do this work.
Absolutely. Guys, I want to thank each one of you for being here and for being so generous with your time. I want to thank those guests who are commenting and are still commenting. And I want to encourage you, if you're watching now or if you're catching this on the replay, to keep those comments coming. Keep those observations and questions, coming. We would love to hear from you guys. I love this. I had to put it up on the screen. Verlandez Jones says, "Weekend healer warriors." Um, yeah, I think that the most important thing that you just heard, because that question that Anne Marie asked, and that so many of you were bringing in, Ellen and others were kind of connecting with that question, really does bring us to the recognition that there are some times we're not meant to do this alone. And that there are, one of the reasons we do this show is so that you guys can be exposed to some of the professionals that are out there that might be able to be a resource. And that I know that I could speak for everyone who's ever been on this show, that if we can't be the resource that you need because we aren't able to be one size fits all. We may be able to connect you with a resource that can. That's one of my big dreams in doing this show. And I know that Kai and I talked about this a couple months back, that our desire is to be able to say, hey, I'm here and present for you. I may not have the answers for you, but I will join you in finding the person who might be able to help you. And so that's what we're all about. So Richard and Vanessa and Marshall, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate each and every one of you. And I'm going to wrap up by mentioning that if you guys haven't seen yet, know that we are doing our Year of Thinking Magically program. I'm really excited about this. This is something that for the last several years I have done on a corporate level for Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies. It's something that has been a great joy for me to see the evolution of people's lives as they begin to it's a private group where we get together every day and share just one aspect of spiritual development that you can tweak, one thought, one practice, one experiment for the day that you can employ. And we do this for an entire year. And the changes for me personally as the facilitator are always incredible. I'm always astounded by what happens. And for the folks that are involved, they tell us that that's been very helpful. And we were going to do this for $25 a month, so that folks had a little skin in the game and to help defray the costs of putting it on a separate server and creating a separate sort of social network for it. And in doing my work, it became really clear to me that this was an opportunity with all that's going on in our world to really push myself. And so I opened the doors and opened the floodgates, and we're offering that program for the entire year at no cost. Those who want to donate can donate, but there's never going to be any pressure to do so, and it's not an agenda-driven program. My focus, my desire, is to be able to do this for you guys on a basis of giving freely, so that we can connect and begin that process of healing the world through intimacy. So this will be a real community event, and those of you that are interested in that, get in touch with me. For everyone else who has been tuning in and commenting, and especially for our guests, I want to thank you for being here. I want to encourage you, as we do at the end of every show, to stay in the moment and to fill that moment with gratitude. Recognize that in the present moment, everything is okay, because you're here, you're sheltered, you're fed, you're alive. And this is where the power is. And when we fill that moment with gratitude, we open the door for the abundance that's waiting for us. Not just material possessions, but the abundance of wisdom and knowledge, that download from the other realms is possible, but only when you're in the moment. If you're starting to feel depression, recognize that that's coming from a preoccupation with the past. And our recollections of the past are a construct. They're not always built on what really happened, but what we think happened, what we perceive happened. And if you start to feel anxiety, that comes from obsessing about the future. And the future is a construct too. Nobody has ever been to the future, but everybody's been to the present moment. And always remember, my friends, the best is yet to come. Vanessa and Richard and Marshall, I love and appreciate each and every one of you. Guys, stay tuned next week as we continue our discussion on these topics that lead us deeper and deeper into this time of the thinning. And thanks for being here.